Welcome to Unit 5, Section 5.2, Creating Variables and Lists. You might want to pause your video and go through these bulleted points here and get a little bit more information on creating variables and lists. I'm going to go through this very quickly. It's pretty self-explanatory when you start making these. The main thing is creating variables and lists that you can remember what they are and using good descriptive terms, and remembering which ones you've created and not trying to recreate them with a different spelling. That seems to be a common error amongst people. And also knowing which ones are global variables and which ones are local variables. And before we get into that, let's go ahead and let's just jump right into Scratch and start making some variables here. So we go to our data section. When we click on that, you'll notice that it has an option to make a variable and to make a list. I'm going to go ahead and click on Make a Variable. Notice my butterfly 2 is selected here. I put the butterfly in there because I thought it'd be colorful and fun. So the variable name, I'm going to call it First Variable. And that's an okay name. I probably should be more descriptive if I knew I was using this variable for something. For right now, I'm just showing you how to create variables. I'm going to go ahead and make this for all sprites. Click on OK. And now, first variable, you can see that it's available right here. And then we have these different blocks show up that allow me to do things with the variable. If I click on the Scratch cat over here, you'll notice the Scratch cat, when I select the cat, data is still the category for the scripts, but it also has the option to access this variable as well, because this was a global variable that all sprites can access that information. So no matter who you are in the world of sprites, you can access this fancy variable right here. Now let's go to our cat. Let's click on Make a Variable again, and we'll call this one Local VAR for short. And we're going to make this for this sprite only. And click on OK. And you'll notice that the cat, sprite 1, has local VAR right here, and it has these block options. More blocks didn't appear. We just have blocks now with drop down options. And when I click on butterfly 2, you'll notice that it no longer has access to this variable called local VAR, which the cat has access to. Another thing to note is up here on these little data windows for the variable, it shows the value up here on this little window. It has the name of the variable. Now notice the local variable we created for the cat, which is sprite 1. It has the name of the sprite and the variable name. The global variable only has the global variable name. So that's going to help you identify local variables versus global variables. Another item to take note is that here on our cat, say on this drop down list, you'll notice there's a little gray line here. The gray line separates the global and local variables. All local variables go to the bottom, all global variables go to the top. Okay, I think that is pretty self-explanatory there. Now let's go and make a list. So we click on List, and again, a list is essentially a fancy variable, except lists can store multiple pieces of information, whereas a variable can only store one piece of information. So let's go ahead and make a list for all sprites, and we'll call this the, let's use the word fancy list. Alright, so we're going to make it for all sprites, and we got our fancy list, and you'll notice all these blocks show up right here. Don't worry about what they do, just worry that they show up. And you'll notice our fancy list is over here on the left hand side. We click on butterfly 2, and butterfly 2 also has access to the fancy list. And now with our butterfly, let's create its own list, except for this sprite only, and we'll call it My Fancy List. That's not a very good name. We'll call it the Butterfly List. Okay, and now the butterfly list is accessible only to butterfly 2 right here. And you'll notice over here on this little list window that shows up on the Scratch screen, it has the name of the variable right there. And it also puts the name of the sprite right beside the list name. So that way you know that this is a local list to this sprite only. Now come back to the cat, and the cat will not have access to that list. I went back to the presentation for going through the section where we're talking about how variables and the list data can be made available to be seen on the stage. And you can do that by clicking on the little check boxes right beside the variable or list name inside the script section of your Scratch program. So if we come back to Scratch, you'll notice that we have this little checkbox right there. Click on that and it will make the list appear and disappear. And the same thing goes for the variables as well. So click on that, it appears and disappears. Let's see, I think that's pretty much all there is for that. And yeah, if you pause the video and kind of go through these points, it'll just give you a little bit more detail on that explanation of how you make these variables appear and disappear. Next, the variable readout. Whenever you have your variable on the screen, there's essentially three different types of readouts for the variable. You have a normal readout, a large readout, and then a slider readout. And the normal readout and large readout, those just display the values. The slider readout actually does something interesting. It can change the value of the variable by clicking and moving the little handle right below the variable. So let's go back to Scratch, and we have our first variable right here. In order to change the appearance, we're going to change first variable right here. I'm going to right click on the variable readout window, and it's going to give me my three options: normal readout, large readout, and slider. I'm going to go ahead and click on normal, and you can see we're normal right there. Right click, large readout, there it is. Right click, choose slider, and here's where it lets me change the values of those. And if I right click and go back to normal readout, you'll notice the value stayed to whatever I dragged it with on the slider. And then this option right down here, which I didn't talk about, hide, that allows you to hide the variable so it's not seen. And you'll notice over here it unchecks that option inside of your script area. Let's talk about lists. Lists are very, very important, and they can also be very complicated when you start having to have your program access information from the list, or to add information or replace information within the list. The list is essentially a collection of data that is organized in a sequential order by its index position. What that means is that if you look at this list right over here, each one of these different items in this list is indexed in a position of 1 to 7. All right, so the thing is number 1, cars is number 2, index number 3 is trucks, and so on and so on and so on. Now over here, this term array, it's another term for a list, and it basically means that there's a certain number of items are stored in a specified pattern. And this would qualify as array because we do have a specified pattern on how the information's entered. You typically see the term array when you get into more complex languages like Java and C# and C++. We're going to stick with the term list because Scratch uses the word list, and I don't want to confuse you by constantly referring to them as array. If I accidentally call it an array, just try to remember that an array is a list in our little Scratch world here. Now on this list right here, you notice there's this little plus symbol. This allows you to add extra information into your list. And let's see what else. Okay, so data, it can be manually or imported into your list. So you can get information from a text file or from another Scratch list and import it into other lists. I've never personally had a need for that within Scratch. However, whenever I've been working with Unity and doing some more advanced programs, that's something that's very common to bring in a data list and import it into your arrays for your program. So that's a realistic tool, and when we get into future programs here with Scratchzilla, we'll actually experiment using that to some extent. And also right here, you notice that we can export information, so that would allow you to export your list and it can be imported into another program. One downside with Scratch is I haven't seen anything that allows you to automatically go out and import and export data list into your program while it's running. So it's something that has to manually be done to get that information in there. I'm sure in the future they'll have that available to you, but for now, unless I'm missing something, there's no way to actually have your program execute that behavior to go and import the list while the program is actually running. So I think that's a limitation, but again, Scratch is a great educational tool. Let's see what's next. Okay, creating broadcast messages. Broadcasts are the signal that tells the other parts of the program to start or stop. It's essentially just a message that gets sent out that tells the other functions to execute their code. You have to get one of these broadcast blocks, and then what you do is you click on the little down arrow, select new message, and give it a name. Big mistake most students have whenever they start creating these messages, they just give it a generic name. They call it message 1, or they'll come up with some crazy name that they can't remember, and then when they come back to their program a week later, they have a hard time remembering what it is that they've done, and they'll go back through and start recreating recreating broadcast messages, and then it just becomes a huge tangled web of message names that don't seem to make any sense. So whenever you do make a message, make sure you give it a name of something that you'll remember. So step 1, click on the drop down arrow, select new message, give it a name, and then click on OK. And then whenever you go back to the drop down list, your message will be available to you. Now you notice right here on the new message, it doesn't give you an option for global or local, or excuse me, for this sprite only, or for all sprites. That's because broadcast messages are inherently global. That means any message you make will get sent out to the entire program. So the stage can receive broadcast messages, and any sprite out there can receive the broadcast message, which makes it a very powerful tool whenever you use it inside your programs. So let's pull up in Scratch, and we're not really having a program do anything here, but I'm gonna go ahead and do something. I got my broadcast message. I'm going to click on new message. We'll just call it test message. Let's not call it test message. Let's call it test hello, and click on OK. And then what I'm going to do is, let's have the butterfly receive test hello. You'll notice it automatically selected it for me. If I had multiple messages, it would do something else. And then whenever the message is received by the butterfly, we'll tell the butterfly to spin around in a circle. Okay, that way we know it is received. So I click on the green flag, and you'll notice that the cat doesn't do anything, even though it has this piece of code right here that sends the message out. Okay, we didn't tell the cat to do anything except send this message, and this butterfly receives the message and begins spinning it around. Let's slow it down a little bit, and we'll say, use this say block here. All right, and the butterfly, we're going to tell it to, it's going to respond when it receives a message saying I just received it. And we'll put it right there. So when we click on the green flag, the cat says it's about to send a message, then the butterfly receives it, then the butterfly spins around. That's how broadcast messages work. Finally, creating your own block. This is really useful if you have a piece of code that you want to quickly be able to implement your program without having to recreate it over and over and over again. That's probably the number one reason you would want to create your own block. It's also kind of cool if you want to show off to your friends on creating your own blocks. It does definitely show that you know what you're doing with Scratch. This is strongly correlated with your more advanced programming techniques that you would see in C# and Java and C++. Whenever I teach students with those languages, we're automatically creating our own, terms and concepts and functions that have to be reused over and over again. So this is a very, very, very good skill to develop with Scratch. We're not going to jump into it right now just because Scratch has made it so easy and so robust that we can go in and start automatically creating some very good programs without having to worry about creating our own blocks. Let's move over to Scratch and let's actually create our own block here. Okay, let's do this with the butterfly. I'm going to hide this list because I don't need that. Move that up there. Let's go ahead and create a block. Let's give it a name. We'll call it my block. Okay. And my block's going to have some options. Okay, you can see right here that I can take a number input, which is also data input. I can have string input, a Boolean input. That I can also label text. And right here's an option that says run without screen refresh. So that means it's automatically just going to run. You don't have to worry about the screen being refreshed before it actually executes. I'm going to go ahead and put a number input on my block and then click on OK. So there's my block with the number input. I paused the video so I could put together this little piece of code. Okay, so what we do is we take our block that we just created called my block. I put it down here underneath this function, and I set the data value to 35. And then over here where I'm defining my block, this is the actual execution of this block that it refers to. And whenever my block is called, it's going to cause this sprite to turn around based upon the data value of number 1. Number 1 comes from right here. You can click and drag this out of there. Okay. Number 1, its value is set by whatever is entered right here. So whenever I run my program, the messages get sent back and forth. Then when my block is executed, it's going to perform this action right here. You can do a lot of cool things with defining your own blocks, so go through and experiment with those. All right, thanks for watching. We'll see you in Unit 6.